wondered if there was still war being waged on the ground above me. If man would still exist on Earth when I saw the sun again. The centuries rolled by. I put my trust in time and waited for the rock to wear down around me.
Guys, welcome to a classic film review of The Time Machine from 1960, starring Rod Taylor, Yvette Mimiueax and Alan Young. Directed by George Pal, it's of course an adaptation of H.G. Wells's cutting-edge 1895 novella of the same name, about a scientist who has built a time machine that can travel through time and who will use it to fast-forward himself to a future when mankind has become subservient to a race known as the Morlocks. Now, on his way, he will be hurtled through time and past multiple world wars with the help of some bleeding-edge special effects. Now, it's the kind of gloriously daft, old-fashioned, widescreen, metro-colour adventure that the 1960s excelled at. Now, apologies to the Back to the Future movies, but this film features both cinema's most famous time machine, a term that Wells invented, and the Oscar-winning cinematic spectacle of what travelling through time may look like. Let's take a look. So the time machine opens 5 days after New Year's Day in the year 1900 as a group of four friends gather in a Victorian house. Their presence requested by their mutual friend George Wells, played by Rod Taylor. As they sit and discuss his recent disappearance from his lab, he crashes into the drawing room looking bruised and battered with torn clothing, and they will soon sit dumbfounded as they listen to the story of where he claims to have been for the past few days, far into the future. Now, the film then takes the form of a flashback or flash forward, I suppose, as Wells, an amateur scientist obsessed with moving into the fourth dimension, explains to his associates that he's travelled across time to find out if the world and the human race will ever be able to rise above their squabbles, and to talk about his discoveries, which are more amazing and shocking than he could ever have imagined.
I say, George, if you're going to start floating about in the future, aren't you going to rather mess things up for the rest of us?
No, the future's already there. It's irrevocable and cannot be changed.
I wonder.
Now, the central set piece of the time machine, as you would imagine, is the time travelling itself. Rod Taylor sitting aboard a steampunk-style sled, pushing forward a lever that basically pushes time forwards around him and his device. Now, like most movies where time travel's involved, the actual science behind it needn't really concern you. It's all total nonsense, but when it's this inventive in its execution, it doesn't matter, because this is where director George Pal and, amazingly, a team of uncredited stop-motion animation artists put on a tour de force of visual effects as we move forward through time, slowly at first as candles burn down and flowers bloom and die, and then zooming into 1917 where Wells will marvel at modern motor cars and learn of the Great War, and then past the Second World War and onto 1966 in the midst of a great war between the East and the West. Now, similar to the Back to the Future movies, the cool thing about each stop-off at a particular time here is that you can search the background for cool little nods to the time period. Flat-screen TVs and wireless shavers are advertised in shop windows here, and buildings on the horizon gradually becoming high-rise towers. Now, the most famous effect here is the device of having a women's clothing store have its window mannequin rapidly alter to mirror changing fashions. At one point, its skirt getting shorter and shorter.
The years rolled by. Everything unfamiliar. Except the smile of my never-aging friend.
Now, it's not all praiseworthy, as they clearly blew the effects budget on stop-motion animation, leaving some extremely clunky miniature work that's a bit shoddy, even for 1960. And before we arrive there, I have to mention that I probably have mentioned in the past in a review for Hitchcock's movie The Birds that I've never been a huge Rod Taylor fan. I'm still not, but he does okay here. The majority of his work involves just looking bemused and puzzled at the world changing around him, and he's a passable action hero come the film's third act. Now, The Time Machine was his first feature film role after he'd been working in television since 1951. Now, I don't think the film industry was particularly taken with him either, as he didn't really get any high-profile roles as time went on. He did voice Pongo in Disney's 101 Dalmatians, and TV fans may know him from his late 80s stint as Frank Agretti in Falcon Crest. Now, in fairness, it's not that hard for Taylor to stand out here because he gets a love interest eventually in the form of Yvette Mimiueax. Now, Mimieux didn't go on to have the most illustrious career either, and here she at least does well in her portrayal as a docile, personality-free human slave who just happens to be stunning and immaculately made up. And so the bulk of the movie is ultimately set in the year 802,701, where humans are treated like cattle by a hideous-looking race of subterranean mutants known as the Morlocks. Now, the future humans, known as the Eloi, all seem to be in their early 20s and have blonde hair and are all white. Now, there is a little bit of a twist to proceedings in the final third of the film, and I won't spoil that, but what I will say is that I do love a good post-apocalyptic movie, and this has that Planet of the Apes vibe in that the humans are at the mercy of a stronger race, this kind of dystopian future where there's a surface of paradise made possible by an underground infrastructure appears many times in science fiction, as early as 1927's Metropolis, and of course in the visually spectacular but otherwise drab 2002 remake with Guy Pearce. So is The Time Machine more than just a visual effects showcase? Well, at its heart, it's one of those rip-roaring adventure movies of the late 50s and early 60s. Think Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Mysterious Island, even Jason and the Argonauts. Now, obviously, unlike some of those, this movie deals with more real-world issues, and coming at the height of the Cold War shows us descending into atomic annihilation in the mid-60s.
It's the last alert! Hurry! Hurry!
No, but listen, this is important.
Look! Atomic satellite zeroing in. That's important.
Now, Wells's original book had the Eloi and the Morlocks represent the dangers and ultimate results of the class structure that he grew up in. And you can see it like that if you squint the right way, the spoiled upper class represented by the carefree ignorance of the Eloi, and the Morlocks being the lower class citizens toiling away in darkness. Now, I think this was H.G. Wells's first published novella, I think. Wells was a visionary and a futurist and pretty much predicted the advent of such things as aircraft, space travel and nuclear weapons. In his first 5 years of being published, he wrote The Time Machine, predicted genetic engineering with The Island of Dr. Moreau and The Invisible Man, and of course laid the foundation for an entire genre with his The War of the Worlds, and all this was before 1900. So before we go, shout out to MGM art director Bill Ferrari, who created the sled-like design of the Time Machine, which of course is splendidly daft but is in keeping with the rest of the glossy Victorian period production design, and of course another great reason why The Time Machine became such a classic film. Go check it out.
Well, it's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard. Absolutely preposterous.
Well, there's one thing I'll say for old George. You always could tell a good yarn. You're a truly great inventor, George.
I think you ought to retire, sir.